We have all sorts of chocolate we're going to work with tonight: milk, dark, white, even some other styles. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about chocolate first. Chocolate has been compared to fine wines in terms of its flavor profiles. And so when you're making chocolate, you don't just pick milk or dark. There's like hundreds and hundreds of styles and flavors and levels of cocoa beans in each chocolate that you choose. So we try and pair things that we're making relative to the stuff that's on the inside. And so when we pair those chocolates, we want those flavors to be complementary. So for example, when we make a truffle, we might make a milk chocolate truffle and put dark chocolate on the outside of it, because those two things that combine together are going to be a great flavor combination. So one of those examples, I'm going to cut one for you here right now. So right now, this is what I'm showing you. This is one of our maple bourbon truffles we've been making for about 5 years. And yes, it does have New Hampshire bourbon from Seabrook, from Smoky Quartz Distillery. So, but you can see, I'm going to cut it in half. And so we actually decided to pair dark chocolate with milk chocolate, which doesn't happen all the time, but I felt that that worked the best, because the subtlety of the bourbon and the maple would be buried if we used just dark chocolate. So we kind of combined some things. The common chocolate I use for my milk chocolate is a 38%. So it's a very smooth chocolate. It's something I found many years ago and fell in love with. The dark chocolate we use is a 61%. So it's on the slightly bitter side. When you cross over from maybe 40, 50% chocolate, you're getting into something a little bit darker, a little bit more flavor. And then for some of our more exotic truffles, we even use a 70%. And we're going to talk about why this chocolate is kind of gray, whereas this chocolate is not. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. There's even a new chocolate out there called ruby chocolate. Most people haven't heard of this. It is not flavored or colored. This is natural chocolate that happens to be coming out of a chocolate cacao pod. And it has kind of a berry flavor, non-specific, not strawberry or raspberry, just a relatively fruity flavor. And it's natural in its pure state as a like a pink chocolate. It's not colored, believe it or not. So we do color chocolates. We use cocoa butter to color our chocolates, as you see here, are ducks. That's cocoa butter that's been colored. So we can combine that with chocolate. We can combine it with white chocolate or other things and make colored chocolates. All right, so tonight we're going to make 4 different things. We're going to make a molded chocolate bar. We're going to make a filled truffle. That's going to be a truffle that we dip in the chocolate. Then we're going to make a molded truffle where we have what's called a transfer sheet in that truffle. And the last thing we're going to do is make some molded bunnies. So we're going to go ahead and get started on one of those things tonight, okay? So first thing we're going to make is our molded chocolate bar. So let me show you an example of what it looks like. We've been working on this for a long time. We're going to be launching our own brand of chocolate soon, called Ogre Chocolates. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that. So a lot of folks know who Lickee and Chewy is. They're my knight, my dragon. Well, we also created Igor the Ogre. He's our chef, okay? And we have our new chocolate bar that we've created with Ogre Chocolates. So we're going to make a chocolate bar that's dark chocolate tonight. And now you can see how shiny that chocolate is. That's important. That means the chocolate was tempered correctly. So let's talk about tempering for a minute. When you melt chocolate, you're breaking down what's called crystals in that chocolate. And you have to melt it to mold it. But in order to make it look pretty when you're done with it, you have to put those crystals back together in a certain pattern, or else it'll be dull and kind of gray the way this chocolate looks. What you've got here is called bloom, okay? There's a couple of types of bloom. There's fat bloom, sugar bloom. All of those things are caused by either incorrect tempering or incorrect temperatures being used when you're making chocolate. And you want to avoid that. So to avoid that, there are techniques you can use. The first is going to be called tabling. So that's a very old-fashioned way of doing chocolate. We're not going to do an example of that tonight. Essentially, you take chocolate and you put it on a table, a marble table, and you move it around quickly to get the temperature from, say, maybe 100, 105 degrees down to the working temperature, which is around 86 to 88 degrees. That's your working temperature for most of your chocolates. So once you get it down there, you're aligning those crystals because you're taking it from a hot state to a semi-cooled state. And those crystals will align, and when they do, you get your shiny chocolate. But it's not just shiny that you're looking for. You're also looking for something called snap, which is texture. So I'm going to break this piece of chocolate here. Now your average chocolate that you might find at the grocery store would probably sort of bend if you broke it in half. But your high quality chocolates are going to have snap. So you can actually hear that and see the breakage there. That's going to create what's called mouthfeel and texture when you eat that chocolate. It's very important. It's a big difference in flavor and the enjoyment that you're going to get when you have a properly tempered and set piece of chocolate. All right, so let's move into actually making a chocolate bar. Let's talk a little bit before we do that about our machinery here. If you want to pan over here, Patty, my first machine I ever had was a Hilliard's Little Dipper. It's a very tiny machine. It only holds about 5 or 10 pounds of chocolate. And we can use that machine to temper chocolate for about 2 hours. And you can only make so much when you only have about 5 or 10 pounds of chocolate. And when I started, I had one machine, that one little dipper right there. After a little bit of time, I was able to afford something a little bigger. So I'm going to have you come over here, Patty. We got into a little bit bigger machinery. So I'm just going to lift this up just to show you what a next level machine looks like. All right, so this is what we use when we want to make chocolate that's molded, whether it's going to be like these pretzels right here. So we're going to run them through this machine. We can set our conveyor belt here and have our chocolate come up and cover our chocolate here. So that was the next level machine I got. So that's for making like chocolate covered Oreos, pretzels, all that good stuff. But when you want to make some really fine chocolate, you've got to move up into something a little bigger. Now these machines are from a company called Selmy. They're made in Italy, and we were able to get a couple of them, and then we expanded and we actually have 3 of them now. One for our milk chocolate, one for our dark, and one for our white chocolate. Now these continuous tempering machines. So what they do is you basically hit a button in the morning, chocolate, and each one of these machines holds upwards of 40 to 50 pounds of chocolate, and this big one over here can hold even more. So that lets us produce large quantities of chocolate or make large items without having to keep adding more chocolate into the machine, because when you add more chocolate, it's going to come out of temper. So thankfully, when we hit those buttons in the morning, 10 minutes later, we're making chocolate. Because if we make something like this giant bunny over here, this guy's about 12 and a half pounds of chocolate. So when we make something like him, he's taking all sorts of chocolate out of there, and we've got to put a bunch more chocolate in there and wait a while to get it going again. All right, so let's go ahead and make some chocolate. So Beth is going to do an example of how we make a molded chocolate bar. Very straightforward, solid bar, nothing in it, just chocolate. So she's going to fill a piping bag with some of our dark chocolate. Now you can see here at the top right, it's at 87.3 degrees. So we set the temperature at 87.5 and it ranges between 87 and 87.5. Now what we have here is a custom mold that we had made with our logo on it. And so we're going to flip that over. I'm going to hand that to Beth and let her do the thing. So she's turning on the machine here, and you can see this is going to vibrate. It's going to take all the air bubbles out of the chocolate bar as she's pouring the chocolate into the mold. And she's going to fill it right up to the edge, and then let it vibrate for another 15 or 30 seconds so that we get all the bubbles out of it. Okay, so the next thing you do is go ahead and put it in a fridge. And we're going to show you, we've already got some that we made earlier today. So after about 15 minutes, the chocolate would be set like you're going to see here. And she's going to do what's called demolding the chocolate. So just a simple flip, and that mold is going to come right out just like that. And there it is. You can see it's got a nice shine to it, just like I was talking about earlier. And something I like to say about chocolate is if we do make a mistake, it's just chocolate, right? So we can either eat it or we can throw it back in there, melt it, and do it all over again. So, because it's just chocolate. All right, so let's see what else we're going to do. All right, so now we're going to move on to something a little bit more exotic. We have two types of truffles we're going to make tonight. The first one's going to be a lavender truffle. It's in dark chocolate with a lavender ganache that Beth has already made, and it comes in a little tiny ball. So we're going to show you how we make those from start to finish. So what we have here is a couple examples of like the various steps along the way. So if you look right here, Patty, this is the first thing I want you to see. Now this is a truffle mold that was purchased. So we buy these in large quantities from a company called Valrhona. And we're going to pipe chocolate into that mold, or we would normally. She's already got a few done here. So the first thing you do is you pipe what's called ganache. Ganache is chocolate and cream and flavoring. So we have different styles of flavoring, different styles of ganache. I'll show you a couple examples of what we use to make these. So you can use, like if you're going to make a raspberry ganache, there's a special, very, very highly concentrated paste that are available to chocolatiers and bakers from various companies around the United States and overseas. And this is just an example of one of them. So we would just use a little tiny bit of this raspberry paste, probably some dark ganache, dark chocolate, because, you know, raspberry and dark tend to go very well together. And we would cook the chocolate and the heavy cream and some butter, and then we'd add the raspberry paste to it. And once it was set, you let it set for a couple hours, and then you pipe it into the ball right there. After, you know, we've done maybe about 100 of those, we're going to cap them. As you can see here, Beth's already capped 6 of these, and she's going to show you how we're going to dip those and turn them in from this to this into that. So as you can see here, she used a white ganache for the inside of this truffle. So go ahead, Beth, if you want to show. We're going to dip a few of these. All right, so what we're doing there is we're going to set up a pan that's going to make it easy for Beth to have a dish that she can dip the chocolate in. And then after she puts it in there and coats it once or twice, what she needs to do is tap the excess chocolate off of the truffle so that we don't have just sort of a big goopy pile of chocolate at the bottom. Go ahead and do a couple more. Now what she's doing here is easy because we have this machine, but it's not that hard for somebody at home to duplicate this with like the melted chocolate that you might buy at a grocery store. As long as you melt it properly, you can dip your chocolates just like we are doing right now. Now before it cools off, she's going to just put a couple of pieces of actual organic lavender dried out flour that she actually got at a store down locally. We want just a couple of pieces, not to overpower the flavor. There you go. And so when you're done, you have your nice finished piece of chocolate right there. Now these we would normally just let set at room temperature. You don't have to put everything in the fridge. Some of the thicker things, like the chocolate bar that we made earlier, we're going to put that in the fridge because it's thick, and if you don't cool it fast, you're going to get some bloom, some of that things I talked about, where you're going to get a little bit of gray finish if you don't let it cool fast enough because it's so thick. The reason this is going to work is because it's a very thin coating of chocolate, and this area we keep at 68 degrees. So when we're making chocolate, we have the air conditioners making sure this area is kept at 68 degrees so that everything's going to set quickly. And I'm going to show you that because by the time she's done making these 6, you're going to see how the other 3 that she already made have already set. So you can see how that's still shiny because it's still wet, but the ones she just made like just literally just a minute or 2 ago, they're setting instantly. And that's because that chocolate has been tempered down to 87.5 degrees. If this chocolate was still at 90 degrees or 92, it would not set up correctly. And you'd know right away, we would know that there was something wrong with the temperature of our chocolate, and we would stop making these until we kind of fixed whatever was going on and then made sure we were setting. And you can see how quickly this is setting and how quickly the color is changing on these. All right. And when we're done, we just throw the excess back into the chocolate machine, and we can always use it for all the other things we're going to make.
Done.
So we're done with that one. All right. I'll be right. I'm going to show you what we're going to make next. It's going to be called a molded transfer sheet truffle. This is an example. These chocolates right here are examples of chocolates that have been decorated with a transfer sheet. You can see on the sides, they're just regular milk chocolate, but on the top, there's some artwork. That artwork is not done by hand. That would take too long. It's done by what we call a transfer sheet. It's basically a piece of plastic that has cocoa butter painted on it. And when that cocoa butter touches hot chocolate or warm chocolate, it transfers the decoration from the plastic onto the chocolate. And after we cool the chocolate and take it out of its molds, we have those decorations on top. Transfer sheets are wonderful because they're quick and easy and they're customizable. We have done logos and specific artwork for people that have asked before. We've actually done chocolates with company logos on them before. So you can make transfer sheets out of almost any artwork you can come up with. So let me show you a couple of different steps in the process here. So this is a traditional chocolate mold. It has 18 cavities, as they're called, and on the back is a metal magnetic base. So I'm going to take that off just for a second and show you what an actual transfer sheet is. Okay, I'm going to just let this touch my hand, and it's just a thin piece of plastic, like I mentioned. Now this is extremely temperature sensitive, so we don't want to touch the top with our fingers because it would melt and kind of make the pattern change. So there are little magnets that are going to hold this plate in place so that when we pour the chocolate in, it will not seep out on the edges. It'll give us a nice straight finish, just like you see on that piece of chocolate there. And what we're going to be making tonight is our banana rum chocolate. So we're going to pipe some chocolate into these. So you can see we already made the ganache, and we let it sit in the fridge for a little while. So this is the next step here. So we're going to show you how we get from here, empty cavity. Let's go ahead and fill this one, to this one, where we have all the chocolate ready to go to be filled with the ganache. So Beth's going to show you how we do that. So she's going to do what's called flooding the mold, which is filling the chocolate into the mold. And you've got to move the chocolate around to fill each mold, each cavity. And once you've done this several hundred times, it's easy. But the first 4 or 5 times you do it, it can be pretty daunting to try and do it without making a big, huge mess. So here, let's just show them what that looks like for a second. Now you can see the chocolate's filled the cavities, but now we're going to vibrate it just for a second so that all the air bubbles are out. All right, now she's going to flip it over because you want a thin shell, not a crazy thick shell. You want a nice thin shell of milk chocolate. And then once she feels like she's got enough chocolate removed, now you can see how you go from an empty cavity to a filled one. Now we would just let that sit or possibly put it in the fridge to set those. Perfect. And now we're going to show you how you fill the molds. Again, this is not something that you actually get right the first time you do it. First time I did it, I constantly overfilled the molds. And if you do that, then you can't put the caps on them, and your ganache starts squishing out after the chocolate goes on them. The reason is because the chocolate actually gets a little bit smaller after it dries. So she's going to show you how you pipe a mold. So traditionally, we would fill the entire mold so that we could cap all of them at one time. But we're just going to do a couple tonight. And we're going to show you a really important secret next step that I learned from a famous chef. And it's how we're going to use a heat gun, believe it or not. Bought at your local hardware store. There's a reason we're doing this, and that is so that the chocolate that's already set melts just a tiny bit so that the chocolate we're going to add to the top is going to connect to it and not have any gaps. So this is something for close to a year I did incorrectly until I went to a class and learned how to do this properly. It's a little tricky because you're only doing 6. But I think it's pretty good. The reason you keep the chocolate molds clean is because you can do this over and over and over dozens and dozens of times, and if you just let the chocolate build up, it's not gonna come out with a nice finished product. So we have some finished product. We're going to show you the next step here. All right, so we made these earlier today, and Beth's going to show you how we demold these chocolates. All you do is take the back off, remove the sheet. As you can see, Look at that, all the chocolate, all the cocoa butter transferred onto the chocolate. And now we just tap it once or twice and all of our chocolates are going to come out of that mold. Good enough. So I'm just going to grab our knife here. We're going to show you how it goes from a start to finish. So inside, you've got your ganache that we made. You've got your nice thin mold. You see how thin that shell is on the edge there? You're basically looking for about a 1 millimeter shell on there, which is really quite thin. You're also looking for uniformity in terms of how thick the bottom is relative to the side walls and the top. So you can see this truffle is about 90% ganache, 10% actual chocolate to hold it together. So that's what you're looking for when you're making fine chocolates, is a uniformity, a nice finish. As you can see here, we've got a bit of a shine on the mold there, okay? And there's a lot of techniques that come into play when you're looking to get a nice shine on your mold. One of those is actually polishing the molds. It's probably the worst part of being a chocolatier. We actually use a very high 90% rubbing alcohol to clean every single mold before we put chocolate in it. And that's how we get that shiny finish. And that's how we remove any particles of chocolate that was made in them previously so we can make a nice finished shiny mold. All right, so we're gonna move on to our last chocolate and our probably most fun, most exciting chocolate we're gonna make. We were lucky enough to have a friend of mine sell me a few of his pieces of machinery that he didn't need anymore. So we have a very unique machine. This comes from Belgium, and it's called a mold spinner. Now, if you want to look over here, Patty, we've got dozens of different molds that we use. These are all from Germany. These are all super high quality molds. They're about a couple $100 a piece. Each one of these can make anywhere from, a dozen to, 3 or 4 molds, depending on what we're doing. The way these work is they're super strong magnets, okay? And we're going to show you how we do this. We're going to fill one side of this mold. We're going to connect the other side to it. We're going to put this on the machine. It's going to spin it all around and move that chocolate around inside these molds. And then we're going to have a hollow bunny when we're done. But you can listen to how strong these magnets are. Okay?
Wow.
So, those molds come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. This being my favorite size for our super giant chocolate bunny. That's the guy over there. So we're going to show you a little bit about how we decorate that mold. Are you going to just go straight to chocolate, or are you going to do any decoration? We're just doing straight chocolate today? Yes. Okay. So if we were going to do a decoration, here we're going to come over here for a second, Patty. What we would do is inside the mold, before we added like the large quantity of chocolate to it, we would add colored chocolate inside that mold for like the bunny's nose and his eyes, or maybe inside his ears, with like some colored chocolate or some white chocolate. And we would just do that with like a paintbrush or a toothpick or even a chopstick. And so you can see, like on our big guy here, we did some paint for his ears with different colors. So that's like dark chocolate, white chocolate, and ruby chocolate, or just colored white chocolate. And just simple extra add-on, but you always have to do that first and let it dry. And then you add the bulk of the chocolate, okay? So, oh, yes. All right, so what Beth's going to do, now that we've got this machine put in, you want to stand back for a second? So once we connect the mold to this, we're going to turn it on, and it's going to spin around like this, and you're going to see how the chocolate moves around inside this mold so that we get a hollow bunny. So again, we're going to fill a piping bag full of chocolate. You can do all four. So the trick is to try and not do too much chocolate, but not too little. If you do too little, obviously the bunny's going to be brittle, and it's going to break too easily when somebody's looking at it to look at the sides and look at the back and, you know, decide if they like it or not. So we find that about 3/4 of the mold to almost the whole thing being filled up is going to be enough to keep him nice and strong. Now, because of all the crevices that have to be filled, we're going to vibrate the mold for a few minutes before we put them on the machine over here. You can see Beth's done this a few times. All right. You can hear how strong those magnets are when this closes. Now she's going to move the chocolate around manually a little bit and put it on the machine there to vibrate the chocolate. This one's tricky because there's a lot of nooks and crannies that you got to fill with those chocolates. Now you can see we've got chocolate pretty filled on both sides, and we're going to put them right on this machine and let it go. So it's going to stay on there for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the size of the bunny. So something like this, Beth, how long would we leave it on there?
5 to 10 minutes.
Like it. Okay, so what we're looking for is once he starts to look like the inside of the chocolate starting to set, like it did earlier when we showed you how it starts to set. That's when we know it's done, and we're going to take it off of that and actually put it in the fridge for about 20 or 30 minutes before we take it out. Now we have some here that we've already finished, so Beth's going to show you what a finished product is going to look like with that exact mold. Perfect.
Oh, cute.
Now you can see all the nooks and crannies that have to be filled, and how Beth's done this a lot of times because she's really good at making sure they're all really filled in. So we're going to do something most people are going to be like, oh my God, no, but I'm going to break one of them. I'm going to break them on purpose so you can see how he is nice and filled out. Okay. Like I said, it's just chocolate, right? So. We're going to use the big knife. Okay. All right. So you can see how in his ears there's quite a bit of chocolate in there, but on his body you can see how it's thin on the edges. And that's what that machine does, is it moves all that chocolate around and makes a nice hollow bunny. But we can just always put that chocolate back in the machine. So if anything comes out wrong, no big deal. We just put it back in the machine, melt it, and start all over again. All right, so I think we could take some questions now.
Sure, you ready?
If we have any.
Get.
All right, thank you.
Somebody says, I just want to eat all of them. Okay, somebody just asked, you might have to repeat me because I don't think they can hear me. How did they make bunnies hollow before the machine?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Okay, so the question is, how do they make bunnies hollow before the machine?
And I have a very good answer for you. So if you look way up at the top of my shelf up there, that's an antique bunny mold that's made out of metal. Okay. So those are some of the oldest molds that were created back in probably, I have no idea how old that mold is, but that is exactly an example of what was used back in the day. And basically you would just put the chocolate in it and move it around manually constantly for about 10 or 15 minutes, the chef or somebody else who worked for them would have to continually move that chocolate. You let it sit this way for about a minute, flip it over this way, have to hold up this way, and just keep moving it around. And we actually had to do that ourselves. We only got this machine, what, about a year ago? So Beth knows exactly what I'm talking about.
My first Christmas.
Yes. We had a few of these molds, but we didn't have the machine yet. Because, you know, everything in time, right? So we didn't have the machine yet. So we were literally, like, constantly moving them, and then we do all this work and demold, like, some Santas, and they break because after all that work, we hadn't done it right, and we'd have to start over and try again. So now there's a way to make solid bunnies. Do you have the solid mold?
That was another question. Would a solid bunny be made in the same machine?
Right. So a solid bunny would be made in a very different mold. There's two kinds of molds. There's open-ended and closed-ended. So all these molds, whether it be for our eggs or for all our different bunnies and whatnot, they're called closed-ended. These are an example, as you can see right there, of an open-ended bunny, okay? And so you just pipe the chocolate in there, let it sit for a while, you vibrate it, get all the air out, and you end up with a cute little bunny just like this guy.
Aww.
So that guy's solid, so he's going to use as much chocolate as probably something twice his size that was hollow.
Someone else asks, how far in advance do you start making things like bunnies and Santas to get ready for holiday?
Yes, absolutely. So somebody asked how far in advance we start making chocolates. Sometimes that's driven just by how much work we have going on and how far behind we are on other things. Beth's nodding her head. So I think a perfect answer is if you look at all the different chocolates that we make, whether it's truffles or pretzels or even our PJ the Dragon and our peanut butter cups, which Beth probably makes, I'm not kidding, about 100 peanut butter cups every single week because we have 7 different styles. So when we make things is more driven by how busy we are with other things. Optimally, we would want to start 2 to 3 months ahead of time. Your molded chocolates, your straight solid chocolates like we're making these guys out, they're good for like 6 months. You know, as long as they're in a temperature that's like 68 degrees and basically room temperature, your solid chocolates like this are good for several months, up to 6 months usually. It's when you fill a chocolate with like Ganache, like these style, they're only good for 30 to 60 days, depending on, you know, how the chocolate was made, what kind of chocolate was used, and what's in them. So the solid chocolate's good for quite a long time. So you can make them several months ahead of time. Of course, then we're driven by how much or how little space we have available to us as well. So.
Someone else asked, how many molds do you have? There's a lot of holidays.
That is a great question. And so we are lucky enough to have well over 400 of these styles of molds. For Easter, I think we have the most. We probably have close to 150 different molds. If you just look right here, these are just probably, this is just 1 or 2 styles of any given mold. So whether it's just some fun eggs that we have here, or here's a nice example. You've got the same basic mold, but in all sorts of sizes. So we actually have close to 450 different molds, the majority of which are going to be for Easter, for Christmas, and for Valentine's Day. But we do have a lot of fun other molds, like our squirrels that really are cute. We have this one that Beth made the other day. Her bear drinking his root beer.
It's cute.
And one of my favorites that she's been making lots and lots of are duck molds. So, yeah, I think altogether close to 450. We have them stored in a storage room down in the basement, all categorized by style. We even have some really strange ones like alligators. We actually have a mold that's about this big of a piggy. So, and we've never made him before, but we could if we wanted to. We've got, I don't know, what's some of the other weird ones they have down there? I mean, we of course have Santas.
Big fish.
Yeah, we have fish, all kinds of fun, weird molds. So,
Bears with trophies.
Yeah,
For some
yeah.
reason.
So before I ended up with this machine and these molds, most of the things we were making were more filled molds that were flat, kind of like the chocolate bar we made earlier. So it's been exciting ever since we moved up and started getting into these more exotic things. So
Someone would like to know the difference between Dutch cocoa for baking and cocoa that isn't Dutch.
My understanding, and I'm not an expert about this, there is this process called, which is used, called Dutch, basically where you take the bitterness out of pure cacao. So if you have a cocoa powder, like if you're using cocoa powder for cooking or baking, the process basically it takes the alkalinity, the acidity out of the chocolate. And that's basically what that process is. Yeah, so that was a question about what the difference between Dutch chocolate and traditional baking chocolate. I think maybe a lot of us as a kid might have tried mom's baking chocolate that was in the cabinet and found out the hard way that it wasn't very good. So Dutch chocolate is where you're going to take some of that acidity out of that before you use it for baking.
We have some questions about flavors. So what are some of the most exotic flavor combinations that you have, or strangest combinations? And what are some of your most popular truffles? Somebody says they love the maple bourbon.
Okay, so somebody is asking about what are some of the more exotic flavor combinations that we've created. I'll be honest, I leave that up to Beth. I give her carte blanche to do whatever she wants when it comes to flavors. Now, I do have a couple that I created way back when I used to actually make chocolate, that being my maple bourbon and some of my caramel flavors. But Beth has come up with a lot of the other flavors, including the lavender. Go ahead and show some of the others.
This one we have right now, it's a Habanero Mango. So it's a layer of Habanero dark chocolate ganache with a layer of white chocolate mango ganache on top.
Ooh, and there might be some rum in there
it does
too.
have some, oh yeah, I forgot the rum.
We don't just make truffles without rum. We have a lot of others. How about the coconut one, Beth?
The coconut one, this is a white chocolate coconut dipped in white and then rolled in unsweetened crushed coconut.
Yes, and that one is amazing flavor.
The lavender vodka one's been very
How about the
popular.
heart though? This one's cute. So
This one is a peach caramel ganache layered with our homemade marshmallow.
something I've been making since the candy bar is our marshmallow, and this one actually has our marshmallow in it. I think if we cut it in half, it'd be nice to see. There you go.
You get a nice layer of the caramel ganache and then a good amount of our marshmallow.
Handmade marshmallow.
So it's my peaches and cream.
Mm. And then we make different flavors for the holidays too, depending on, you know, the time of year, whether it's fall, and we put some, you know, some of the fall flavors, the cinnamon, nutmeg, and spices in there, or gingerbread flavoring. And then in the spring, you know, we'll change
Summer,
some.
when I experiment a lot in the summer, so a lot of weird stuff comes out.
Ooh, something to look forward to.
Someone has another difference between chocolate types question. What's the difference between bittersweet and unsweetened chocolate?
So I think that's going to be more the types of chocolate you might find at the grocery store. There is essentially going to be sugar in almost any type of chocolate we use. Unsweetened chocolate almost traditionally is going to be strictly for baking, where you're adding sugar in some other form. So where you're going to be using like 100% cacao level of chocolate. So unsweetened chocolate, no sugar. It's basically the purest form of chocolate. There are some brands of chocolate that are coming out lately that are amazing flavor, that are 100% cacao, no sugar, that are you know, worthy of eating just in their natural state. That's kind of what's like cutting edge with chocolate right now is these 100% cacao bars that are wonderfully tasting, kind of like different fine wines in terms of the level of flavor profiles that are in there. So unsweetened chocolate isn't that common in the chocolates that we use, but essentially, you know, when you're talking about the chocolate we were talking about earlier, like a 61% versus 70%, you're talking about the level of cacao, but also the amount of sugar that's in each product. So the higher the content of the cacao, the lower the content of the other few ingredients that are in these.
Going back to the bloom, when chocolate goes bad and goes cloudy, has it bloomed? Is that a flop? Like, what happens when chocolate goes bad?
So when chocolate blooms, it's not as flavorful or necessarily something that would be as enjoyable as it was in its original state. A couple of things happen. The most common of which is where the fat has separated from the chocolate. Because chocolate itself is an emulsification of sugar, cacao beans, and the cocoa butter. So those basically those three things. And when those things start to separate, you lose the texture, you lose the flavor. For us, if that happens, it's easy. We can just remelt it. But if you happen to buy a chocolate bar that's, you know, 5-6 months old, and you see that it's kind of cloudy like that, it means that the flavor and the texture has changed, and it's not going to be as flavorful or quite taste the same way. Now, for us, it's easy to reuse this chocolate and put it back in its correct state. But if you buy something that's got bloom on it, then it's not going to be as enjoyable. So more often than not, that's going to happen. Like if you have a chocolate bar that you bought, especially a solid bar, and maybe it melted, or maybe you had it in your hand for too long while it was still in the packaging, and you put it down, or maybe you put it in the fridge, that is going to accelerate that process of bloom. A lot of folks like to enjoy their chocolate cold in the fridge, but refrigerated chocolate tends to bloom much faster than something kept at room temperature.
Somebody asked, what is the most technically difficult type of chocolate that you make?
That's going to be the ganache and the truffles we were making, where I was talking about earlier about keeping that very thin shell and creating a ganache that has a great flavor profile that matches the shell. Generally speaking, you want the shell just to kind of hold it. It's kind of like the bread in a sandwich. It's not, you know, it's not the main event. So you don't want your shell to overpower the flavor of the ganache. So those are the most difficult, because sometimes you'll think the flavor is going to be correct, and then like you make the ganache, and the ganache is wonderful, and we know that the 61% chocolate's wonderful, but when you put those two together, you find out the hard way after you make 100 of them that that's not the great like combination we were looking for. And so the hard part is that making that decision that we need to scratch this and start over because the flavor's not right. So that's going to be the most difficult thing, the truffles. I took a class with a chef, his name is Chris Harvey, that is, you know, he's an expert in flavors and techniques, and there's a lot to learn where I had no idea, and trial and error will only get you so far. So it's definitely going to be those truffles, the things like these here, like we were showing you earlier. So, and there's a lot of techniques too in terms of how when you make this chocolate to make it look right, because if you're asking somebody to buy this for like $1.50 or $2, you want it to be perfect. You don't want like extra chocolate kind of hanging off the edge or pooled around the bottom. So our caramel is very difficult to kind of have that pretty finish. So if I was making a truffle that came out like that, I would throw it away and start from scratch. So you want your truffles to be nice and clean finish, nice and square, very thin cap, very thin mold, but great flavor.
All right, this one's a burning question. What's the biggest thing you've ever made out of chocolate?
So the two things that we've made during the holidays. So this guy over here, this bunny, is easily the largest thing we've ever made. And then the Santa we made was, oh, and the turkey. So Beth's like kind of sighing as she hand painted this turkey that was an open mold. It's not a closed mold. It's not something we were able to put on here. He's I don't know. I guess he was about this tall and this wide, so like this when he was done. And she hand painted the inside probably for 2-3 days.
Wow.
So 2 or 3 days of hand painting the inside to make it look like a really beautiful actual turkey, and then filling it 2 or 3 times and moving the chocolate all around by hand, dumping it back out, letting it set for a little while, and then doing it again, because if it wasn't thick enough, it would break. So in the end, it was probably about that thick in terms of the chocolate, and I think he probably weighed 12 or 15 pounds. Yeah. Right, and then we had to disassemble them and put them back in the machine at the end of Thanksgiving. But, you know, that's what happens to turkeys at Thanksgiving, right? So.
Okay, going back to molds again, if somebody wanted to have a specialty mold made, the person says, for example, if Dover wanted to have like a Garrison Tower mold made up, would that be possible?
I do know that there are companies that can create those. I have not worked with them, but it is possible for us to create a custom mold. The question is if there was somebody who wanted to create a custom mold of like the Garrison Tower in Dover or something like that. Could it be done? Could it be done? Yes. Would it be expensive? Absolutely. It'd be extremely expensive. These molds by themselves, which the company that produces them creates, you know, tens of thousands every year, they're about $300 for that. So if we asked them to make an actual replica, you know, that would be expensive. I suppose we could probably find somebody that does a 3D printing and find a different way to do it. You know, we'd have to find a workaround. So.
Let's see. Someone asks, do you have all of your recipes memorized, or do you still need recipe cards? That probably goes for both of you.
Yes, so I do not have them memorized. At one point, I was able to make the marshmallow cream without having to look at my recipe. But if you want to take a look at Beth's books of recipes here, ranging from things that I created, things that she's created, or things we've learned from other chefs, everything is in the books, because you never know when you're going to have to tweak things. And just because I made, for example, the maple bourbon 6 years ago, like that took about 6 months of tweaks and changes until I was happy with it. So you write the recipe down, and then you write it down again and again and again. And but you never get rid of the original. I always keep like all the various versions, so I know what changes I did. So personally, I don't have any recipes memorized. Beth?
Marshmallow.
So the things you make, and peanut butter, right?
Peanut butter.
So.
We have another, what is your favorite thing to make of all the things?
Oh.
For both of you.
Mine is caramel. I like to make caramel the best.
I'm a big fan of our caramel apples. We were not able to show you our machine that we make our caramel with. It's a massive bronze copper kettle that we have in another room, because when you make caramel, it creates a lot of steam. You don't want steam around your chocolate. So you make your caramel on the other side of the house, you make your chocolate on this side. So you got to keep them separated. But we both really enjoy making the caramel. It's fun to see it change from the ingredients to the finished product, and so I really enjoy making caramel. That being said, I also like to make something that we didn't show you guys tonight called a slab truffle. A slab truffle is an example. I'll bring you over here. This is our raspberry truffle. This is an example of what's called a slab truffle. We would make a sheet of ganache about the size of a half of a baking sheet, so about this big, and it's going to have a layer of chocolate. It's going to have a layer of ganache, and we're going to let it sit in a frame. If you can look up there, you see those square frames. So we make it in that square frame. We let it sit for a day, and once it's set, we take that frame and that slab ganache, and we put it on this special machine over here. This is called a guitar cutter. Okay, so we put it on here, and you bring that down, and it cuts it in a perfect square. You turn it 90 degrees. Well, you bring it up again. You don't make the mistake like I did of turning it and then not bringing it up, because now you got to turn it back. But so you bring it up again, and then you turn it 90 degrees, and you bring it down, and you end up with 96 perfect squares,
Wow.
just like that. And then you take those squares and you hand dip them, or you can put them in our conveyor belt and let it be done by the machine. So I actually really enjoyed making those because I guess they're the easiest out of all the truffles to make. So
Somebody asked how much chocolate you make every day.
oh, that's the best kind of.
So about 8 hours.
Yeah, about 8 hours worth. So when I started, I did absolutely everything. I made the chocolate, I made the ice cream shakes, I priced all the candy, and I rang people up. I distinctly recall making chocolate and stirring something while I was actually ringing people up at my
Wow.
at my first store, at my small first store. Now with Beth making chocolate, she's here all day and can basically dedicate her whole day to making it. So I don't know, probably.
When I do peanut butter cups, it's about 8 trays, 1 of each, and about 25 to a tray, so 200 peanut butter cups.
Just in one
usually,
day.
Just to
So and
this.
so our peanut butter cups are that big.
Stop it.
So we use that
Look at that.
shell and we mold. So she's got to put the chocolate in the mold here in the shell and let it sit, and then make the peanut butter. Put the peanut butter in with a scoop so that they're all exactly the same quantity, and then cap them and decorate them. And she can make.
We've got about 8 different styles.
So she got about 8 different flavors of peanut butter cups, from plain milk, white, and dark to exotic ones with handmade fluff, peanut butter, Nutella, all these things in them. And she could make a couple hundred in one day. So I couldn't, but
All right, that one got me back. Those are awesome.
we are a little bit limited, I think, in our space. This is our entire chocolate production area. My first store was smaller than this. So with everything that we have here, in a perfect world, we'd have almost 3 to 4 times the amount of space to do what we're doing. But we kind of make it work back here, and we do our best. So
Amazing.
but we can make a heck of a lot. Like if I actually helped Beth someday, we could make a crazy amount of chocolate in one day. So what else do we have?
I think that's everything for questions
So
far.
I think that's all the questions we've had. I hope everybody enjoyed watching us make some chocolate tonight, learning a little bit about the behind the scenes here at Lickee's and Chewy's. We kind of like to create new things every time we have a chance. This summer, like Beth said, is when we kind of get to create new things because there aren't too many holidays that we have to dedicate our time to. So that's when we get to get exotic and create new fun things. But yeah, so that's what we're up to. And again, thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, well, on
Thank you
behalf
so
of
much.
everybody at the, you're gonna flip
I'm going
us
to flip
around.
us around.
Okay, it is. So this is like Emily and I's dream. We're gonna jump in these chocolate bats right now.
Just like Charlie and the Chocolate
That's
Factory.
right. No, but seriously, Beth and Chris, this was amazing. Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much.
you.
People are so privileged to be able to see this.
Yes.
So we thank you for your time.
Yes.
This has been amazing.
Absolutely.
And starting tomorrow morning, we'll have little kits available for folks to come to the children's room at the library to pick up. There will be instructions and supplies to make a chocolate-covered Nutter Butter bunny and a chocolate cup. So if you'd like a kit, while supplies last, they're in the children's room starting tomorrow morning. If you have any questions, just give us a call or email us. And like I said, there's going to be a little survey that comes up in a moment. But thank you all for coming.
Some advice on using the chocolate.
Yes, let's flip that around
Oh,
again.
yeah.
Yep.
So a little bit of advice on using the chocolate that's provided in those kits, because you're going to melt it in the microwave, is to do it 30 seconds at a time and stir it. And although after the first 30 seconds it's going to look like it hasn't melted, you'll find out when you start moving it around that it has. If you do it at 60 to 90 seconds all at once, it'll burn it. So 30 seconds at a time, just a little at a time, just keep melting it and stirring it. That's the most important thing.
All right.
Excellent
That's,
advice.
that's, yes, thank you so much for that. And again, thank you for everything.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining
Thanks
us,
for joining
everyone.
us. Have a great night.
See you at the library.
Yes, bye.
Bye.